So we made an Antikythera. Now, there have been about a dozen replications of this, and I was particularly inspired by a chap called Clickspring, who made his from brass using original technique and tools, and it is a beautiful machine. Now, we don't have those materials or those skills, I certainly don't, but I do have the laser cutter and a 3D printer, which is what inspired this actual build. Now, this video is going to be all about how to build it in a step-by-step manner, and of course you'll be able to find the files on Thingiverse. There's quite a lot of them. You can either laser cut parts or 3D print the whole thing. Now, it is complicated, so I'm going to split it up into parts, and my advice would be follow it part by part. So take part one and make the pieces. There'll be a little bit of 3D printing and a little bit of laser cutting. When you've cut out or built the pieces, then put them together and then move on to part two, rather than trying to cut everything, having a big stack of gears and spending ages going, which gear was that again? So you get a bit lost unless you follow the parts, and the parts are how I plan on breaking it up. So here's part one. I've drawn this up in Tinkercad. The colour gears are to be cut from 5mm acrylic, the orange gear is 10mm acrylic, and the light green little spacers are 2mm acrylic. The light blue you 3D print, and you'll also need a bit of this. What this is 8mm acrylic bar. Okay, let's get some printing and cutting done. So to put this together, there's two kinds of glue which are kind of cool. Super glue, obviously, which will glue just about everything, but it does dry with a kind of whitish film, and that can ruin clear acrylic. So what works really well is something like this. This doesn't actually glue it, it welds the acrylic. It's a solvent, it will dissolve a bit of the acrylic, and then when it dries, the acrylic is bonded, but it doesn't leave a white film, and it does a beautiful joint. So either of those or both of those is going to be good. Now, to start this, we take this bit here and glue those feet onto the white circles using super glue, like that. Then put it to one side to dry. And take your washers, so you've got this really tiny washer and you've got this flat piece, and we need to glue them on top of each other. Use your solvent, put some round on the edges. Take that, press it on and leave it to evaporate. When it's evaporated a bit, paint round the edges and you'll get this. Now you're going to need 3 bits of your 8mm acrylic bar, one at 20cm, one at 22mm and one at 27mm. Take one of the short ones, this is the 22mm one, and it's going to go in there, and then we glue it in, just as we did with the others. So a bit of solvent swelled and paint it around there to glue that in to make a peg. With the 22mm bar, you want to take the larger of the single cogs and glue it onto the bottom. Take the 10mm gear and the shorter post and push it through that. You'll notice that the arm lengths differ. That's the shortest one there, and it pushes underneath on the short arm, and it should be a tight fit. So then take a bit of your bar 32mm long and glue it to the large gear and this, which is a spacer. So it glues in there with the spacer going in between like that. Now take a long rod and that goes in the center and meshes with the top of the gear there, and then this one goes in there to mesh with the other gear. So it looks like that. Then if I turn that top rod, all those gears turn nicely. Flip it over and then this small gear goes on there. You should have 4 gears left. The massive gear, the large gear, the medium gear and the small gear. The small gear goes on top of the medium gear and you glue that in place. Take the second pin, which is the longer, push it in there and it should be free to spin, and then that presses into that last hole to engage with that gear, and it should be a tight press fit. Right, what you should have left is that gear, and these 3 spacers. This is cut from 5mm acrylic, and then we've got 2 cut from 2mm acrylic. The way it stacks is on here. So the 5mm goes first, then the gear, then the 2mm, and then finally this very large gear. And they all need gluing together in one piece. When it's done, that's what it should look like, and if I turn this rod, all those gears should turn, and that's part 1 done. So that's the base unit finished. Now part 2 is about the first 3 planets, which is the Sun, Mercury and Venus. Of course, I turned to Tinkercad and drew this up, and as per usual, the cream colour is meant to be cut in 5mm, the orange colour in 2mm acrylic, and the blue, the light blue, is meant to be 3D printed. So let's get on with that. To start this, we need these 3 arms in acrylic, and these are the arms that are going to connect to the rods, and we glue these tubes into them. And again, they only fit in one position, so glue them into position. First we do the sun mechanism, for which we need these 3 gears. You'll notice that one has a strange shape, it goes straight on there. Then that one without a hole in it will go into there, and that one with a hole in it will go into there. And to do that, we need some bits of 8mm acrylic bar. Actually, 2 bits, 10mm and 12mm long. First we do the sun mechanism, for which we need these 3 gears. You'll notice that one has a strange shape, it goes straight on there. Then that one without a hole in it will go into there, and that one with a hole in it will go into there. And to do that, we need some bits of 8mm acrylic bar. Actually, 2 bits, 10mm and 12mm long. Glue the 10mm here and the 12mm here. Then drop the gears into place. Then take a small 8mm plastic spacer, drop it on the top and glue it carefully onto the top without gluing that gear to the centre peg. So for the next layer we use this big cog, and it's got a flange in there so it won't turn, it slots on there like that. Then we have this little cog where it's got 2 holes in it, and that's going to go on there. But to put it on there we need a little setup for it. So for the setup we need a bit of 8mm acrylic, 15mm long, and that gets glued into the centre of that cog there. Then we have this special spacer here that gets fitted on that way up, and it has locating pegs to locate on the main arm of this gear here. And then we have an 8mm by 2mm washer that goes on there, and the washer gets glued to the peg, but be careful not to glue the spacer onto it. So it's like that. Then these locating pegs go into the holes there, and we glue that onto there, but don't glue this in place. Just glue the locating pegs, and it glues back on to the main ring right there. So for the final planet layer, we use that gear here, which is again keyed to this shaft, so we pop it on there. And then we'll be using this gear here, which is going to go there. Now for this one, we need a bit of 4mm acrylic, 20mm long. We do the same thing. First of all, glue it into there. Then we use this spacer, which goes on there. And then we use this little washer, which goes on there. And that whole thing goes into that hole there. And it's got locating lugs there and just under that cog there. Now when we've done that, we can rotate this larger outer ring and check all those gears are working, which oddly enough they are. Now we can slide on these tubes. First one goes there and goes out to, this was the sun, so the sun one. The middle one goes to the middle, so it slides on there and goes to this middle gear here. And then this last one slides on there and goes to there. Now there'll be a spare tube. That's actually the date tube, and that slides on last. Then we have a bit of 8mm acrylic bar, 28mm long, and it goes into this arm here and the whole of the sun there and just gets glued in place. Then we take a piece of 6mm bar, 25mm long, and it goes through here and gets glued in place on that gear there, like that. Finally, a piece of acrylic bar, 4mm wide by 22mm long, and it goes in that section there. And that finishes part 2, which is the first set of planets. Let's get on with part 3. Right, part 3. Now, part 3 carry Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, so that's 3 epicycles we need to construct. Here's the Tinkercad drawing, and as you can see, mostly the gears are what we're cutting out of the acrylic, and they're in the cream colour, and they're meant to be cut from 5mm acrylic. The orange is 2mm acrylic, and of course the blue are all the things that we're going to 3D print. So let's get on with 3D printing. To start, grab this piece and these 3 gears with the largest holes, starting with the largest gear, pop it on there, middle gear, and small gear, and then glue them all in place. So it's like that when it's dry. Now when it's dry, what you need is the frame, and this bit goes in like that. And of course you've got a bit poking down, so you need a big cup, and you set your frame on your big cup. Now you need these 3 gears. These gears have all got a little hole in them, and they go onto here, and they only fit one way, so you don't really need to worry too much about it. You just drop them onto there, like that. Now you need 3 bits of 6mm acrylic rod, and these 3 bits of rod fit in here, here and here. With your 50mm rods pushed in one place, set your frame to one side. Then you need these 3 tubes and these 3 gears. Now they only fit one way, so there's no reason to worry about them. That goes in there, that goes in there, and that goes in there, and you just glue those in. Now we need to revisit this, and you'll notice in each of these gears there's a hole in it. That's because it takes a peg of 6mm acrylic, and respectively they're 10mm, 15mm, and this one 25mm, and each one goes in its respective hole and gets glued in place. When you've done that, you'll have these 3 odd spacers. These 3 odd spacers go on the cogs here, and their job is to raise it so the next cog's at the right height and to prevent that cog from falling off. So you put a spot of super glue on them and super glue those into place. And when they're in place, you have a set of corresponding spacers that drop on those pegs, on 2 of them, not on that one. That one's a bit tight. Now we can drop the planet tubes in place. So the first one to go in is there, and it uses this one. This goes in and rests on that peg so that it engages. Then the next one is there. And the final one goes there with this final gear. Then we have these 2mm spacers, and they glue on there and there. Now we're going to turn this upside down so gravity will drop everything out unless we put these spacers in. Finally, you've got some more spacers, and you put them onto those axles, the large one going there, the medium one going on there, and the small one, thin one if you like, going on there. When you've done that, we're ready to put this extra base plate on. This base plate only goes one way, so you make sure that you've got it in the right location, feed the axles through the holes, and you'll notice there's some locating pins. You put a spot of super glue on those pins and fix that base on. And when you've done that and turned it upside down, check again the gears work. Take hold of that centre one and just give it a twiddle and just make sure that all those gears move as they should move. Okay, so now we've got our bottom part finished and our top part finished. Of course we need to fit them together. And to do that, we take this date tube and the top part, slide the date tube in until it pokes up there, and then glue it in with a little bit of glue so that it's glued in there. Then we slide that whole mechanism onto there, and if you notice on the ring there are some locating dots, and then underneath each of these legs have some locating lugs, and you arrange that so that the dots meet the lugs, and it will only go one way, so keep swiveling it around until you've got the right ones, and then glue that in place. So here are the parts from part 4. The orange is from 2mm acrylic, the light blue is meant to be 3D printed, and the cream is meant to be cut from 5mm acrylic. And I'm going to cut mine from some fluorescent acrylic because I have some and I think it looks cool. So we're going to need a bit of a plate for it to stand on, and I happen to have this, which is 10mm by 300 by 300 clear acrylic. Mark the centre, line the centre up with this centre rod, drop it on, and then put a bit of glue in place to hold it. So we need this bit here and these 3 legs here. These legs get glued into this bit so that the short end is like that, and the top of this is level with this flat piece here. Then when that's had time to dry, turn it upside down and slot it on here. Now it is keyed to this, so it doesn't need gluing. You just slot it in place and let it drop down. And then we glue these legs to the baseboard. And when the legs are glued, we have 3 of these blocks. The blocks go into the leg and hold everything square and stable. Then when we've done that, we can take this piece, which is 300 by 300 with a 46mm hole in the centre, and pop it on the top, make sure it's lined up, glue it, and that's the top. So then we can start adding the dial indicators. And these are the dial indicators, and they run Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, date, Mercury, Venus, the Sun. And date is what it says, it points at today's date. Now these are made out of fluorescent acrylic 5mm that I happen to have, and I engraved Saturn and the traditional Saturn sign on it, but I have seen these made using planets, so instead of using indicators you could use planets. I like the indicators because it makes it look more like a clock, and I think it's more in the spirit of the way the original was made. But they put one on top of the other onto those central spines, and they decrease in the size of the hole, so there's only one way you can go, so all you do is pop those on and fix them with a little bit of glue, and that's your dial indicators done. Now it's driven by a gear attached to this. There's a small gear there, you have a handle, you turn the handle, works a bevel gear, and it drives that cog. And if we move that around, then we can see that's very cool. You see all these moving in relation to each other. So cool. Okay, so as far as the mechanism is concerned, all we've got to do is put the moon on the top here, and the drive cog that I was just talking about. But for some weird reason, I don't know why, I love these as decorative elements. And of course we're going to put a handle on, so let's put some feet on, and we glue the feet on the corners like that. For the moon, these are the parts. This bit goes straight onto the acrylic rod in the centre. That bit also goes on the acrylic rod, but it must be free to spin. That bit goes on there, this bevel gear slides in there, and then this gear goes into there, holding everything together. Now everything must turn really, really easily at this stage. Spot of glue on that bevel gear to hold it in place. So with the moon gear made and that one glued in place, it just drops in there and engages with that gear. Now, the reason it needs to be free to spin is it works from its own inertia. You might also have noticed I've put these here. And they're purely decorative, there's no reason for them at all to think apart from. I think they look pretty. I mean, it harkens back to the classical period with modern materials, and I like that. But they are purely decorative, so if you want other decoration, knock yourself out. Those columns are what I'm going to use. Okay, the final thing, the drive mechanism. Now we could run this from a motor, obviously, but I'm going to make a hand crank again in deference to the original. For the drive mechanism, of course, I turned to Tinkercad, and the light blue bits are meant to be 3D printed, and the only laser cut bit is in green, and it's cut from 10mm acrylic, and that's the cog that engages with the main drive ring. Once you've printed them off, this is what you'll get. Now to assemble it's pretty simple. Take that, drop it on there, take that, click it into place to hold it in place. Then we need this bit which glues on there. There we go, and we drop that rod in there, glue it in, and then the crystal gear goes on and glues on the top there. For the drive section, we glue those two bits together like that. That bit glues on there, facing that way out, and the handle glues on there. So when it's had time to dry, take that bit, slot it in there like that. Take this bit of glue here and here, slot it in there like that. Then when that's had time to dry, what it'll do is I can turn it that way, and of course it transmits the motion 90 degrees. That engages with the main ring gear of the Antikythera, and bingo, we have a drive mechanism. I should point out, when I said glue that onto there, do not glue it to that central axle, glue it to the carrier, otherwise it won't turn. Underneath you'll see it's got an L shape to it. What you do is choose a side, slide it in, and then engage the cog. Move that L-shaped bracket until it's flush with this back edge. There we go, like that, and then glue it in position. Okay, and that is the build finished. Now, if you want a better look at it in operation and how to go about calibrating it, then check out the main video, which I've linked at the end of this video, and I do that bit in that video. This is strictly just a build video on how to put this together. Now, I will say one thing. It took about 3 days to do. 2 days of 3D printing and 1 day was the laser cutting. If I'd 3D printed the whole lot, then you're probably looking at a couple of weeks rather than a couple of days. It really made things much quicker and everything went together beautifully. I still haven't put the ring on the top. It needs a date ring and it needs maybe, I don't know, a zodiac, maybe position of the planets, something like that. So when these arrows point to things, then you can actually read it off and use it. Equally, that I haven't done yet, and I'm probably going to do that again on the xtool P2 because of its laser engraving function, which I did use on these arms here, and it came out really nicely. Anyway, that's the video done. The files are all on Thingiverse. There's a link to that in the description if you want them. There's a link to the demonstration of it working video at the end of this one. I hope this was a help to you. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and please do remember to like and subscribe.